Thanks to Clare Higgins, our former mayor, and she will be introducing our stellar panel over here in just a moment. So I know there are some elected officials here. We have our Register of Deeds, we have our sheriff, we have some ward chairs, and our mayor, as I said, and there's probably more. So thank you all for coming tonight. We really appreciate it. We got some incredible questions from the public for this, which have all been forwarded to the panelists. So I'm sure if you ask questions, you will hear them tonight, or you may hear them tonight. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Clare Higgins. She will tell you the order of races that you'll be hearing tonight, and then get this started. So thank you all for coming, and thanks again to the candidates.
Did we introduce them? We're going to introduce you when you speak. Okay. You just had like a moment. Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, yeah, good. Hi, everybody. Is this mic on? It looks like it is. Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome candidates, panelists, and audience. Those folks who were standing in the front, you'll actually meet later, so don't worry about that. And I want to thank the Democratic City Committee and the Northampton Open Media for sponsoring this event. Our panelists this evening will be Bill Newman. Bill's a partner of the Northampton law firm of Lesser, Newman, Alio, and Nasser, and the host of the Bill Newman Show on WHMP, broadcast daily, live at 9 and rebroadcast at 5. I tried to say that like a radio announcer. And Bill is also a monthly columnist for the Daily Hampshire Gazette. Dan Crowley is the executive editor of the Daily Hampshire Gazette, Greenfield Recorder, and the Athol Daily News. He's worked as a reporter and editor in the Pioneer Valley for more than 2 decades. And Elena Frogameni is here with us today, and she's a graduate of Northampton High School, where she was active in the high school Democratic group, served in student government, and was the school's representative to the Northampton School Committee, among numerous other activities and accolades. She's currently a senior at Mount Holyoke College, where she's president of the Mount Holyoke College Democrats, and in the fall will be headed to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, only one of 32 in the country. So congratulations to you on that. And she's foregoing studying to be with us today, so thank you for that. But I wouldn't worry because you have the Rhodes Scholarship. Okay, so today's format. The order of opening statements, closing statements, and answering questions was determined randomly by a computer. I will be calling on the candidates in the order that they were randomly chosen. There will be brief opening remarks. All candidates will have 2 minutes for an opening statement, 2 minutes for closing, and 2 per question to answer the questions from the panelists. The order tonight is the candidates for Attorney General, Secretary of the Commonwealth, and Auditor. Questions will rotate through the panelists, and the order of answering on the questions will rotate through the candidates. At the end, panelists will have a chance to follow up questions of the candidate, assuming there's time, and I'll keep track of this. And with the help of Julie Pocola, who is our skilled and experienced timekeeper. Panelists were given all the questions submitted by the public, and they took them and used also their own ideas to formulate the questions they'll be asking you today. And I'd like to ask you to hold off on clapping till the end of the closing arguments in order that we have enough time to hear from everyone. This will, and that may actually allow us to squeeze in a question or 2 extra if we do it right. So let's begin. I'm going to start with opening remarks, and the first person to speak will be Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, everyone. Now I know you can hear us. Thank you, Swellen. Thank you, everyone, and of course, thank you to the organizers for having us here today. Really honored to be here. And actually, not just being in Northampton, I spent the day in the area. First, I was in Amherst, visiting the Survival Center, and then just came from Greenfield, talking about, of course, all we can do and need to do in the context of mental health, the opioid crisis, and so much more. So really honored to be here. Obviously, I'm Andrea Campbell, and I'm a candidate for Attorney General. I jumped into the race really recognizing that families right now are struggling in the Commonwealth, and that many feel frustrated with government and are very concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to prosper and thrive and rebound coming out of COVID. What I also know to be true is that we live in the best state in the nation, a state with such potential and promise, in that government, and especially the Attorney General's office, can indeed help our residents with their daily struggles. And how do I know we live in the best state in the nation? I think I am living proof. When I was 8 months old, my mother actually died in a car accident, going to visit my father, who was incarcerated at the time. My father and my brothers cycled in and out of the prison system, and my twin brother, Andrea, died 10 years ago on the custody of the Department of Correction when he was only 29 years old and as a pretrial detainee. And so I do think I'm living proof that a girl who grew up in public housing in a family torn apart by such tragedy could turn that pain into purpose. I'm the first in my family to go to college, the first in my family to become a lawyer. And I've dedicated my life to making sure every resident in this state has access to the same opportunity I had. I started my legal career representing children in education cases for free, especially students with disabilities. I've also worked as an attorney for Governor Deval Patrick. I've also worked as a general counsel at a regional planning agency. And I'm running for AG, stressing that this office is more than just the top cop or chief law enforcement office. It can indeed help families with everything they're grappling with every single day. Thank you for having me.
Next is Quentin Palfrey.
Good evening. I'm Quentin Palfrey. I'm a proud Democrat running for Attorney General. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. I grew up in Worcester County, and there's a shared understanding that sometimes Beacon Hill doesn't see the whole state, and I'm very pleased to be back in Northampton with you today. As a former Assistant Attorney General, I've seen firsthand how much impact the AG can have on communities all across the state. I was the first chief of the healthcare division in the AG office at the time that we were implementing Massachusetts health reform. So we worked really hard to make sure that everyone had access to high-quality, affordable health care. I sued some predatory health insurance companies that were taking advantage of Massachusetts residents during that critical time. I also had the great honor to serve in the White House under President Barack Obama as senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness. And on day one of the Biden-Harris administration, I joined as the acting general counsel of commerce, led a team of several hundred people, and helped to launch the Build Back Better agenda. When Trump was in office, it was refreshing to see the AG fight back again and again and again against a corrupt and immoral administration. But now more than ever, we need the people's lawyer to lead on the really big challenges we face. Racial injustice, the climate crisis, attacks on our democracy, attacks on workers' rights and reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, student loan debt and housing costs, gun violence. We have so much work to do. And I'm really excited about this opportunity to talk with these two wonderful candidates and with all of you about the big challenges that we face and what the state's Attorney General can do to help lead on the issues that affect people every day. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shannon Liss-Riordan. I'm very excited about this run for Attorney General. I have spent my entire career taking on the biggest challenges and delivering big results for regular people. For the last 23 years, my entire legal career, I have represented working people. I've made national headlines, leading teams of lawyers, taking on some of the largest corporations in America, and time and again, we've won against corporations like Starbucks, FedEx, Uber, Amazon, IBM, my alma mater, Harvard University, which I have proudly sued at least 4 times. I've represented all types of working people, waitresses, construction workers, janitors, Uber drivers, strippers, and helped them recover hundreds of millions of dollars that corporate America stole from them. This work has changed industries across Massachusetts and the country, and I'm proud to have spent my entire career fighting for the people against the powerful and winning, which is exactly what I plan to do for you as your next Attorney General. I see this race as a job interview, and I ask you all to consider my background, my skills, my experience, my passion, and my unparalleled record in delivering meaningful change as you're choosing who you want to hire to be the next lawyer for the people of Massachusetts. I'm the only candidate in this race who is a practicing lawyer. I'm the only candidate in this race who has run a law firm. I'm the only one who has won the jury trials, who has won the appeals to help shape our laws to better and more fairly serve the people. I've been an activist lawyer throughout my career. I am proud to have the support of about 40 labor unions across Massachusetts, representing well more than 150,000 working people. I humbly ask for your support in this race, and I look forward to this conversation that we'll have tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So the first question is going to be posed by Elena Frogameni.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you to the candidates for attending. My first question is, if and when one of you enters office in 2023, you'll begin a new era in the office after Attorney General Healey's 8 years. What, if anything, would you do differently from Attorney General Maura Healey?
And the first person to answer that question would be Mr. Palfrey.
Thank you so much for that question. So I had the honor to work alongside our current Attorney General. I was the chief of the healthcare division when she was the chief of the civil rights division. We worked together very closely. I think the office has been incredibly successful in recent years, taking on the really big challenges. And I think it's really important to have an Attorney General with experience leading the kinds of multi-state cases that the AG has become so known for, taking on ExxonMobil and Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, whose lies brought us the opioid crisis, taking on the Trump administration time and time again, and understanding the vast array of responsibilities within the office. I've also led a team of about 400 lawyers in the Biden-Harris administration. I think I could take on this role effectively starting on day one. I think that with Trump out of office, there are some opportunities to shift our focus to some of the really big challenges we face here at home. So I think one of the differences that I would bring to this is a little bit more of a focus right here at home on healthcare policy, on jobs, on education, on taking on the climate crisis and workers' rights. I think that this new era affords us some opportunities to really give accountability to the state police and really be focused on community issues out here in Northampton and all across the state. But I think that we're building off of an incredibly successful legacy in the office. The AG has been really successful in fighting for working people as the people's lawyer, and I would like to build off of that legacy as Attorney General.
Thank you. So Maura Healey has been a terrific Attorney General, and I am excited about the opportunity and possibility of stepping into her shoes and expanding on the terrific work she's done. I am the most qualified to do that because the work I've been doing for the last 20 years is holding corporations accountable and enforcing the laws, and I will continue to and expand on her work in enforcing our wage laws, in expanding and protecting consumers, and in fighting against climate change and getting us to where we need to be with the next generation roadmap that the legislature has now put in place. On wage enforcement, my modest-sized law firm, I have led teams of lawyers to recover hundreds of millions of dollars and put that money back in working people's pockets. So I will expand on the work that the Fair Labor Division is doing to get money back in workers' pockets more quickly when bad actors are stealing from them. That's what I've done for my career. For consumer protection, there is so much more that we can be doing to make sure that bad actors are not stealing from consumers, are not deceiving seniors, and we need to also do some serious work to expand tenant protections. On environmental litigation, I know from my work over the last 20 years that getting the right laws in place is only the first step. You need an experienced, seasoned Attorney General who knows how to enforce the laws to make sure that we get to where we need to be. Laws don't enforce themselves. I know that from my experience. I have led teams of lawyers across the country to enforce laws against corporate bad actors going across state lines. I'm the only candidate who has coordinated with multiple Attorney General's offices across the country, not only Massachusetts, but New York and California. So I am ready on day one to take over and expand on the great work we've seen from Maura Healey.
Thank you. So I want to, you always give credit where credit's due, and our current AG, as everyone else has remarked, is incredible and has done some amazing work, and we have a national platform and reputation of doing incredible work to address the opioid crisis and climate, which we would absolutely need and should continue. Where I would show up a little differently, I would absolutely prioritize the issues of prison reform, juvenile justice, and criminal legal reform. I see all those systems as being connected. This is very personal to me. I quickly mentioned the passing of my twin brother, Andrea, but he died while in the custody of the Department of Correction 10 years ago. And my family still doesn't have a sense of how that happened. This is something that affects many families, the conditions in which we confine folks, the lack of humanity from electeds or many others, and seeing folks behind the wall, the increase in the number of women. There are some really horrific things happening in our prison systems. And as I crisscross the state, I was just in Berkshire County this past weekend. These issues affect many families. So I would prioritize those issues in a way that I don't think any AG, frankly, has in the past. The second is looking at issues through a more intersectional lens, really helping a family. The unique thing about the AG's office is all of its bureaus and divisions are situated under one office. So you can indeed help a family. And what I know to be true is families are struggling with different things. And if we want them to come more into government and to see government as a solution to the issues they're grappling with every single day, the bureaus and divisions are going to have to work more in partnership, less in a siloed way, to help that family that is dealing with wage theft, that is dealing with environmental concerns, lack of access to green space, housing insecurity, and so much more, and working with local electeds and leaders to get things done through a family lens. And then lastly, establishing a greater presence of the office, particularly in Western Mass, this area, as well as Pittsfield and many other communities, in gateway communities, in center cities, and surrounding communities that feel left out and left behind.
I'd like to follow up Elena's question, if I might. I have just a sentence that's really informational for the audience. I know you all know it. The Attorney General's office has a large and wide portfolio. It's organized into 6 bureaus: the Executive, Criminal, Energy and Environment, Government, Healthcare and Fair Competition, and Public Protection and Advocacy. Each bureau is divided into divisions, and one of the divisions of the Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau is the Civil Rights Division. I would like to know your opinion as to whether the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office has sufficient resources. The Civil Rights Division is charged with the responsibility of ending discrimination and ensuring equal opportunities and protecting individual rights. And I would like to know, given that broad charge, what would be your priorities? What civil rights and liberties are you going to make the priority of your administration?
I think the Civil Rights Division needs more resources. Frankly, that is an issue that I've been talking about on the campaign trail, that as a civil rights lawyer for the last 20 years, not only have I collected wages and put hundreds of millions of dollars back in working people's pockets, but I have fought discrimination in the courts, discrimination of all types, against race discrimination, sex, age, disability, sexual orientation, and I think there's a lot more that the Attorney General's office could do with the proper resources to fight systemic discrimination directly. I think that a lot of the focus in fighting discrimination in the Commonwealth has been put in the hands of the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, which is an institution that doesn't have the resources and capability to take on all of these systemic issues. I've brought so many discrimination cases, including against the state itself, which has used an outdated exam system for promoting and hiring police officers and firefighters, and based on systemic race discrimination work that I have brought, I've gotten firefighters and police officers of color hired across Massachusetts. I've taken on companies that have not hired any non-white workers and got them ordered to diversify. I've taken on IBM in a systemic way, and you may have seen in the Boston Globe on the front page just a few weeks ago some of the pretty shocking documents that I uncovered about IBM's systemic attempt to rid itself of older workers. I've taken on Uber for its race discrimination against drivers because its customer rating system has a discriminatory disparate impact on black and brown drivers. Those are the types of cases I've taken on as a private attorney general throughout my career, and I plan to use the power of the Attorney General's office to take on these and other extremely pressing systemic instances of discrimination because I know how to use the courts to get that work done.
First of all, thank you, Bill, for the question, because actually in the conversations we've had thus far in forums and other settings, the Civil Rights Division and the work of that Bureau actually doesn't come up, not Division Bureau. So thank you for the question. There is a lot more to do in that office, and I will say the attorneys there, I think, want more resources and more of a sign-off to do more of the work. Actually, the woman who runs, Amanda, who runs that particular bureau, we worked together on juvenile justice issues with the Youth Advocacy Division years ago when I started my legal career representing kids in education cases. So one is prison reform and the conduct and the issues that we are seeing in our prisons. Some of the top referrals or calls into the AG's office have to do with misconduct within our prison systems or houses of correction or Department of Correction. This affects, of course, not only those who are incarcerated, but even correctional officers and people who work there. That division absolutely, I think, has a lot more to do in that space, and they want to. The second is when we talk about public corruption. There's a lot more that the division could do, and this public corruption includes policing reform and transparency and accountability and pushing for more of that. I chaired the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice for the City of Boston for 6 years. So it doesn't just mean making sure public safety agencies are adequately resourced, but when there is a horrific case or lack of transparency, that these same agencies are held accountable and that no one's above the law. Public corruption and that Civil Rights Division go hand in hand, along with additional requirements related to criminal legal reform, the post requirements. This particular bureau is going to have to take on a lot. But also, I would just add, in the context of education, as we are crisscrossing the state and going into communities where we are hearing about high rates of anti-Semitic behavior, racist incidents at various schools in the education context, the Civil Rights Division has a critical role to play, and I think we'll have a probably more expansive role to play going forward to protect our youth. And these issues do not get the attention they deserve, given the number of cases that the office is already working on.
So the murder of George Floyd and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that there are two justice systems in America. We imprison too many people for too long for doing too little. Race has too much to do with who ends up in the criminal justice system. And the AG needs to lead on criminal justice reform, needs to lead on police accountability and corrections oversight. The AG needs to take on structural racism across our authorities. So we're almost 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education, and still our schools are segregated. There are radical inequalities in the resources that we spend on each kid. Where you live and the color of your skin shouldn't determine what kind of an education your children get. And so I think we need to, as the Chief Civil Rights Officer in the Commonwealth, we need to take on that educational injustice with the urgency that it deserves. Roe versus Wade is hanging on by a thread in the U.S. Supreme Court and in states all across the country. The AG needs to stand up for reproductive rights, which are under attack. LGBTQ rights are under attack, not just in Texas, when the heartbreaking news that the Texas AG was going to treat gender-affirming care as a child abuse issue, or when the Florida legislature passed the Don't Say Gay bill. But right here in Massachusetts, we have attacks on LGBTQ rights. Unfortunately, structural racism appears in every part of our life and our economy. Unfortunately, when we're dealing with the climate crisis, communities of color are often hit the hardest. In our voting rights system, communities of color are the ones that have the most obstacles to registering, voting, and having their votes count. We see structural racism throughout our economy, and it needs to be at the forefront of our work on housing and on consumer protection. So no, we cannot silo the AG's civil rights responsibilities to one group. We need to be committed across the office to taking on these challenges with urgency.
Is this on? Okay. I have a special microphone. The Attorney General has increasingly played a role in the area of environmental justice. Last week, for example, Maura Healey joined 12 other Attorney Generals calling on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to consider the impacts of proposed natural gas projects on communities that are already overburdened with environmental harm and on greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change. What are the responsibilities of the Attorney General in terms of environmental justice, and what specific initiatives would you pursue in the area if elected to the position?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I always, of course, want to give our current AG and her entire team, frankly, credit for the work they've done in this space, particularly not only within the state, but nationally. And we do have a national reputation on these issues. I've been blessed to engage with some current AGs who are open to having conversations with candidates in this race, and that's one thing that comes up is the leadership of our current office. So I think it's important to continue that leadership, and there's a whole host of ways to do it. One is, for me, where I start in the conversation is we need more people at the table. I was talking to Rebecca, who runs that particular bureau in the office, Tepper. She's amazing, and if any activists in the room have been doing remarkable work, you've worked in partnership with her. And she has already expressed the need to actually take this conversation on the road, to pull in more communities of color so they understand the magnitude of why we need to address issues related to the environment and climate. The same in our rural communities who don't necessarily see these issues as relevant to them. That includes sometimes shifting our language to make it about jobs, to make it about as we shift to a clean energy economy. We want those residents, of course, to have the resources to green their homes and their communities so they're not bearing the brunt in terms of the bottom line, in terms of their utility bills. So pulling in these communities is critical if we as a state want to continue to be the leader and to solve for these issues. And that coalition building is what I am passionate about. The second piece, of course, absolutely implement our new roadmap laws, ensure, of course, that we are implementing those requirements. That is going to require us to have tough conversations with communities and municipalities on where we place this new infrastructure as we transition to clean energy, and also having conversations about blocking and allowing municipalities greater power and authority on infrastructure that is what you were just talking about, gas infrastructure, not creating more infrastructure there. But the other piece is around jobs, there's something there, and more affirmative policies. In Chelsea, they have a project now creating more green space. In Springfield, the AG's office is working on a project to address asthma rates. There are more types of creative policies like this, too, that I think the AG's office needs to invest greater resources in order to have a more robust conversation and to include those environmental justice communities that feel left out.
So the climate crisis is one of the greatest calamities that humanity has ever faced. What we do now and what we fail to do will determine what kind of a life our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren lead. And I just came out of the Biden-Harris administration. I was there on day one, and on day one, there was an executive order that essentially said, no matter what you are doing in the administration, you need to take on the climate crisis with urgency. And I think that there's an important lesson there that I would like to bring to the AG office, issuing a similar kind of memorandum, which is that taking on the climate crisis needs to be a priority for every part of the office. You talked about environmental justice. I was talking about this a moment ago. Communities of color are the communities that get hit hardest. They often have the least political power to push back against siting decisions, and the people's lawyer needs to stand up for those communities, stand up for those environmental justice questions. But we need to take this issue on with urgency in everything we do. The Environmental Protection Division has brought some of the most important cases against ExxonMobil, against the Trump administration, the Massachusetts versus EPA case. We need to lead in the transition to a clean energy economy and an oversight of the utility industries. There is no such thing as bridge fuel. If you've seen that IPCC report and the lackluster action on the international level, you know that we have not a moment to waste to urgently move to renewable sources of energy. We need the Civil Rights Division to take on environmental justice. Justice, we need the AG to use the bully pulpit, stand there with a bullhorn when they're trying to dump radioactive water in the Cape Cod Bay, stand there and protest every new pipeline, and fight for carbon tax, fight for legislation to urgently move to renewable sources of energy. The leadership is lacking at the national and the international level, and so we need to lead right here in Massachusetts and with regional collaboratives, and the AG is one of the most powerful voices for climate justice and for fighting the climate crisis that there is.
Thank you. Fighting climate change is one of the most pressing issues that is facing us. That is why I have called on all the candidates in this debate to have a debate specifically on climate change, because I think the voters of Massachusetts deserve to hear from each of us about more than a soundbite, but what our priorities and methods will be to do everything we can from the Attorney General's office to fight climate change. And I'm glad that the other candidates in this race have now agreed to join me at the end of May in that discussion. So as I said earlier, laws do not enforce themselves. We are now on the road to where we need to be with the next generation roadmap that the legislature has put in place, but we need a strong Attorney General, a seasoned lawyer who knows how to enforce the laws and hold corporations accountable to it, and that is what I've been doing through my entire career. I plan to use the full power of the Attorney General's office, including the criminal powers of the Environmental Division, to ensure that corporations are complying with these rules and not just making it look like they are, but that we're holding them accountable to make sure that the way they're describing their actions actually matches up with what we're doing. And I'm also planning on setting up a green bank where we will take the penalties that we will recover from litigation against these bad corporate actors who are violating our rules and use it to fund clean energy projects, environmental justice projects. And it is absolutely critical that we have all stakeholders at the table when we're making these decisions about where to site the infrastructure and about how to ensure that corporate America does not use our transition to clean energy sources as an excuse to get rid of the good-paying union jobs that we have in the energy sector. We need to make sure that the transition is a just transition and that it is fueled by good-paying jobs. Thank you.
So I'm going to, and I'm trying to save enough time to have some follow-ups if possible. So with that being said, I'm going to go to Mr. Newman.
There's been significant controversy in Massachusetts in the last couple of years, particularly about the police and their entitlement to what is called qualified immunity. I know all of the members of this panel and all the candidates know this, but for our lay audience, qualified immunity can be a confusing term, and qualified immunity is distinct from, for example, absolute immunity. And for police officers, although it's called qualified immunity, it really nudges up very close to unqualified immunity. And what I would like to know from each of the candidates is, what is your position with regard to the police and the ongoing legal controversy about qualified immunity, and what is the Attorney General's role in this controversy?
Mr. Palfrey.
So I would like to eliminate qualified immunity for police officers who are involved in altercations that lead to harm to individuals. And I think that this is something that is really an important set of reforms for us to undertake in a time when we really need to rethink our broken criminal justice system. I think that it's really important for us to move away from the set of policies that have led to dramatic over-incarceration of communities of color, huge increases in our prison population, huge and staggering racial injustices in criminal justice, and in a world where people of color often need to give the talk to their children that I have never given to my own. And I think that we need to put in place a series of new policies that recognize the urgency of reforming a system that for too long has permitted two systems of justice and two systems of accountability. And I'm afraid that qualified immunity is an example of a policy that has been in place for too long that has allowed people in law enforcement to abuse the trust of our communities to act with impunity. And so I do believe that that is a policy we need to move away from. As the chief law enforcement officer in the Commonwealth, we are not obligated to defend the indefensible. We are not obligated to be on the side of injustice when it stares us in the face. The AG needs to lead and lead towards a juster society. That means walking the walk, and it also means being a voice for reform.
Thank you. Ms. Liss-Riordan.
There's a lot that needs to be reformed about our criminal justice system, and some of the ways that I have already been involved in this fight in my capacity as a private attorney general is one. I have, as I had mentioned, I'm responsible for the hiring of many black and brown police officers across the state, and I think it is important that our police departments are more reflective of the communities that they served, which will build more trust between those departments and those communities. I've also partnered with the ACLU to increase transparency among police departments, and we've done public records requests to get departments to turn over statistics regarding the racial breakdowns of incidents that officers have had with members of the public, arrests, stops, and other interactions. On the issue of qualified immunity in particular, there's been a lot of discussion on this issue. I'm afraid that a lot of the people who have talked about this term don't fully know what the doctrine is. I know this very well because I also worked as a federal law clerk for 2 years right out of law school. I drafted decisions about qualified immunity, and I know that the doctrine is used too often to shield police officers from liability when they have caused harm to members of the public. The idea behind the doctrine is that if a police officer is in good faith trying to do his or her job, they should not be held liable for their conduct. But the problem is, and I agree with retired federal judge Nancy Gertner on the problem with qualified immunity, the law has become too stagnant. The courts do not spell out what is proper behavior and what's not proper behavior. And I think what is important is that everyone understands their rights and their obligations. We need to spell out the rules more clearly. The role that I could play as Attorney General is working with the legislature to make sure these rules are spelled out more clearly and that police officers have proper training so they are not engaging in abuses against the public. And the doctrine of qualified immunity needs a lot of reform.
Ms. Campbell.
If we say no one is above the law, then the AG absolutely, as a chief law enforcement officer of the state, has to play a role in these critical issues. And one place to start is to take a position opposing qualified immunity. I've done that before as a previous, of course, as a local elected in the city of Boston on the council there. I chaired that committee for 6 years, the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. It's not just incidents we're seeing across the country that warrant us having a deep conversation and taking this position. It's also what we see here. I mentioned Springfield earlier. I was in Springfield having conversations with folks about serious concerns related to officers and misconduct where there was no accountability. I was just in Pittsfield. There are concerns and still questions in the community about an officer and a gentleman who was killed who had mental health concerns. And so at the end of the day, this is an absolute bar to accountability and transparency and justice. That's a problem, and the AG's office uniquely positioned to have a conversation. But it's more than that. In the context of policing reform, it also needs to be about the larger conversations. Are all of our public safety agencies adequately resourced? I know City of Boston, we are so Boston-centric in this state, they have enough resources. Other communities do not. We're thinking about post requirements and other ways in which rural communities and other part-time police officers and others are going to have to comply with these new laws. That's a major concern that we're going to have to address and the AG's office is going to have to play a role in. And then other ways to build transparency and accountability at the local level and with the state police. We now have in Boston the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency. I drafted legislation working with our previous mayor and his task force on that. That's historic. It has a civilian review board component. Other municipalities want to have these conversations. Body cameras, we have that in Boston. The community demanded it. I chaired the committee. We, as a community working partnership, we have that. The mayor of Fall River said, I want this. And so there are other conversations the AG office has to play a role in on these issues.
Thank you. I think we're going to have time for 2 more questions from the panel, and then we'll see if there's any time for follow-up. But the next questioner is Mr. Crowley.
We have some of the poorest areas in the state in Western Mass. What role should the AG play in this area, and do you have any plans to address poverty through the Office of the Attorney General?
And the next person to answer is Ms. Liss-Riordan.
The Attorney General is the Attorney General for the state, and I will be the Attorney General for the state. I was out here just a few weeks ago, standing on the steps of the Springfield Courthouse, which is a sick building, and announced that as Attorney General, I would not allow any staff to work in that building, and it needs to be shut down, and a new location needs to be found. I was very proud to be out in Springfield this afternoon also with UFCW Local 1459. I'm very proud to be able to announce today the endorsements I've received from all the UFCW locals across Massachusetts, including Local 1459, which represents thousands of workers in Western Massachusetts. There are critical issues that need to be addressed out here that are different from the needs of people in the greater Boston area. We need to have West-East Rail, for one thing, and the point that I made before that I plan to set up a green fund from the penalties that we will collect from environmental polluters can use to fund important clean energy projects, including West-East Rail. I plan to be out here a lot as your Attorney General, and I want to listen to you and hear what your needs are, and will be here just as much as I am anywhere else in the state.
Thank you. And Ms. Campbell.
Major issue. Regional equity, major issue. I just remarked that I was in Berkshire County. That was the second time I was back in Berkshire County since we kicked off the campaign in February. And actually, when I launched a campaign in Boston, that same day went to Worcester and then went to Springfield. And it was important to me to do that because I know communities, including rural poor communities out in Western Mass, feel left out, left behind. And they're not making that up. That is real. We are a Boston-centric state. We focus a lot on Boston. I get it for different reasons. I'm born and raised in Boston. I know it to be true. And that's a major problem in everything I think that we do. And so we have been getting out here. We launched this Gateway Cities tour. I know we want to maybe say center cities or reframe even the language around that to really get out and listen to communities and the work they're doing, to hear about how there are so many pockets of families living in poverty. And I'll name it, largely concentrated in some areas with white residents. There are, of course, cities and other communities with communities of color living in poverty, lack of access to health care, a good job, certain type of infrastructure. They don't have anything sort of preparing them to create a more resilient community, housing affordability, access, you name it, housing insecurity. Amherst today, I was having a conversation at the Survival Center. Food insecurity is a major issue in this state, including out here. And so there's so much the AG's office can do, and I have been stressing that. This work for me personally is about breaking cycles of poverty, trauma, and criminalization. Professionally, it's pushing the boundaries and the possibilities of what government can do to help a family. And the AG's office can help a family build wealth. It can help you stay in your home. It can help you buy a home. There are many folks fearful of a potential foreclosure crisis. The AG's office can help with health care and inequities in health care, both in communities of color and our rural communities, and bridging those conversations to ensure every resident has access to physical and mental health care. Wages, you go to work, you don't get paid. The AG's office can help, of course, the communities in which we live to make them more resilient. So that holistic approach is what the AG's office can do, and that's exactly what I would do.
Thank you. Mr. Palfrey.
So our state government, and especially our Attorney General's office, needs to do a better job of serving the whole state, doing a better job of community engagement. I grew up in Worcester County, and I think there's a shared sense here and there that Beacon Hill often doesn't see beyond the greater Boston area. I want to change that as Attorney General. The fight against poverty and inequality has been one of the animating features of my career. I was the executive director of the Poverty Lab at MIT that uses evidence-based policy to try and make sure that poverty programs are informed by the best evidence available. I was senior advisor for jobs and competitiveness in the White House, and also worked in the Biden Commerce Department. What we see is that our economy works for those at the very top and doesn't work for everyone else. The increase in the difference between the very wealthy and everybody else is just growing and growing over time. We need an AG who will fight for working people, who will fight against wage theft, which is $1 billion problem in this state, who will fight against Uber and Lyft, trying to misclassify workers and take away their benefits, who will fight for a fair share amendment, asking the very wealthy to pay a little bit more so that we can invest in transportation and education and build an economy that works for everyone. We need accessible Wi-Fi and broadband all across the Commonwealth. We need accessible transportation for everyone, including fare, free transportation. We have a lot of work to do. And as the people's lawyer and the consumer protection champion, the AG can be at the forefront of that fight for economic justice. That's what I want to do to lead on this set of issues.
Elena Frogameni is going to ask the next question, and Andrea Campbell will be the first person to answer.
Thank you. So last week, the Massachusetts Senate passed a bill that would legalize sports betting in Massachusetts, but it did not include betting on college sports. Most states which have legalized sports betting have allowed some sort of wagering on college sports, which makes Massachusetts an outlier. The House bill, in comparison, does have collegiate sports betting included. Which bill do you support and why?
I'm glad we have 2 minutes versus a round-robin situation because both bills have good pieces of it. I think in the college context, what I'm hearing the most, if we are going to pass this, which it looks like it will happen and the governor will sign it, to be a part of this industry, we want to make sure that we are truly a part of it and reaping all the benefits like any other state in terms of revenue, et cetera. And that if you're not in the college arena, you're leaving a large percentage of revenue on the table. So what people have come up with, and I think talking to folks, including colleges and students and other youth-based organizations, is making sure that if we do that, it's for maybe out-of-state college institutions, not in-state, which I think is actually a good compromise. It doesn't sort of jeopardize or run into the concern that if you do it on in-state, with in-state colleges, that you will create some type of culture or atmosphere on campuses that may lead to criminal activity or other things of concern. So I do think that's a nice compromise. The piece that I actually am more concerned about, that probably isn't getting us enough attention, the editorial board in the Globe mentioned a little bit of it, is the addiction piece. So I come off the city council in Boston, and I remember having a lot of conversations, particularly in communities of color, our Asian community, around the increase in gambling and this as an addictive behavior that was causing serious concern, not just for the individual, the family, and the community. And very little attention to those issues. That's a major one. The Senate version has a lot more, I think, in its version of the bill to address those concerns. You can't use credit cards, for example. You can only use cash. After a certain amount of time, you can't even swipe anymore. You have to wait before you can go back and place a bet. So there are, I think, some provisions in there that would help us, if this were to pass, to protect against those issues, and also, of course, to have awareness and education on how it is a major issue and an addiction. At the end of the day, addictive behavior. So whether we are at a recovery center or something else, and I was just with John Merrigan and others talking about this, it involves all types of behaviors, so we have to be careful. I see the stop sign.
Mr. Palfrey.
So I think one of the things that we should focus on when we open up new areas of revenue and new industries like the cannabis industry is to make sure that the folks who are harmed the most and have been left out the most are the ones that benefit from the new resources. So the lens that I would take on both this and the cannabis issue is making sure that we're making sure that the revenue goes into treatment, that it goes into dealing with some of the structural challenges that we face in our economy, that we're using these new sources of revenue to make sure that everyone gets a piece of the economic benefit of that. And so I think that that's really the focus. I agree with Andrea. I think those are thoughtful remarks about ensuring that we are not fueling something that has a harmful effect on the communities who are using the newly available tools. And so I would certainly be concerned about trying to mitigate those harms.
Thank you. Ms. Liss-Riordan, yes.
So I understand that sports betting is here with us to stay. It is happening in surrounding states. So it makes sense that here in Massachusetts we shouldn't be leaving money on the table, that people are placing their bets in other states, and we should be tapping into that revenue stream. So I understand that this is likely to pass in some form. I am concerned about the issues that have been raised with respect to collegiate betting, and I think that the compromise of limiting it to out-of-state collegiate betting makes some sense. But I am particularly concerned about the corporations who are already in this business and the concentration of power among those corporations and how they are going to be taking advantage of the people who are going to be placing those bets. I'm concerned about the regressive nature of this taxation and need to make sure that we absolutely have all the protections in place to protect consumers, to make sure they're not taken advantage of. We need to have those protections to make sure that people are not using this as a way of getting in over their heads, which is going to lead to problems for families and for communities. So with those protections in mind, I am supportive of the bills, but as Attorney General, I'm going to use the full power of the office to protect those consumers from abusive behaviors by the corporations that are going to be involved in this industry, like I've been doing for my entire career, holding corporations accountable.
Thank you very much. We don't have time for the remaining questions that you so carefully crafted, so if you want to share them with people after, they would probably like to hear them.
That was quick.
But I'm going to start with closing remarks, and actually, Ms. Liss-Riordan has the first crack at the closing remarks.
Thank you so much. Very much enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm looking forward to continued discussions with the other candidates in this race. I ask you again, as you're making the decision of who you want to hire for the next lawyer for the people of Massachusetts, that you keep in mind who has the experience, who has run a law firm, who has held corporate America accountable. I have put hundreds of millions of dollars back in working people's pockets as a private attorney general for the last 20 years, not for a year or two, but for my entire career, more than 20 years. I know how to use the law as a tool to make people's lives better. I'm very excited about the support that our campaign has received from across the state, from about 40 labor unions. Here locally, I'm very proud to have the endorsement of DA David Sullivan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I have spent a lot of time in Western Massachusetts and will continue to do so during this race. I thank you all so much for being here today and look forward to seeing you all again. And I humbly ask for your support as your next Attorney General. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Ms. Campbell.
Thank you all for having me, and thank you to our moderators as well. You have busy schedules, and thank you all for being here to take time to be a part of the conversation, and there might even be some people online, and thank you to whoever's online as well. I'm proud to, I'll say, have the endorsement of former Congressman Kennedy and Senator Markey in this race, and elected officials and local elected officials covering every single county in Massachusetts. but I'm not taking anything or anyone for granted. And so I'm happy to be here tonight to share more about my candidacy, of course, vision for the office, but most importantly, to come out and to listen. I started the day in Amherst and then went to Greenfield and then came here to listen to individuals and organizations on the ground that are doing the work and have been probably for decades, to really talk about how the next AG can co-create policy, can co-create solutions to the very issues that our residents are grappling with every single day. That's the type of leadership I will bring. It's a bottom-up approach. It's not top-down. It is about showing up, and it's absolutely about showing up in Western Mass. And I've been here several times and will keep coming back. In addition to that, there are major distinctions in the race. I think my legal background is more comprehensive. I started my career representing children for free, especially students with disabilities. Education will be centered in this race, along with the well-being of our youth, in ways I don't think any AG in the past has really centered those issues. I worked in state government with Governor Deval Patrick and so many others. My legislative background is also unique. The next AG is going to have to move legislation through the State House on wage theft, health disparities, you name it, so much, policing reform, all kinds of things, in order to get things done that help our residents. I'm the only candidate as both an attorney for Governor Patrick and as an elected who's passed legislation and moved legislation through the State House, which I think is unique and distinct. And I also think lived experience is unique and it matters, and that representation matters. And I know my lived experience is absolutely unique and will inform the issues I work on, including criminal legal reform. I hope to earn your support during the convention process and in September, and thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. And Mr. Palfrey.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much. Thanks for the wonderful questions. Thanks to my fellow candidates. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to be with us today. I just wanted to focus on a couple of issues that sort of didn't come up today. I'm very proud to have won the endorsement of Progressive Mass and the Progressive Dems of Mass. And I just want to point out that there are some very significant differences in this race. We touched on qualified immunity, but there are differences on single-payer health care, on safe injection sites, on charter schools and whether to expand the cap, on fare-free transit, on police accountability, and on rent control. But the biggest difference in this race is about clean elections. Our democracy is literally under attack. An armed mob stormed the Capitol to try to disrupt the peaceful transition of power. But one of the most corrosive things in our politics right now is corporate-funded super PACs. And I have called on both the other candidates to join with me in signing a people's pledge to keep corporate money out of this election. And I hope that both of them will join me in that. The corporate-funded campaigns have been really prevalent recently. In the 2016 charter fight, that money flooded in from the Waltons and from Bloomberg. In the 2021 Boston mayor's race, there were super PACs involved, some of which are still open today and potentially available in this race. And Uber and Lyft are already starting to flood money in to a ballot referendum. We got to get corporate money out of our politics and have an election where this kind of a conversation is how you make your choice. So you can make your choice on the basis of the backgrounds of the candidates and where they stand on the issue position, what their vision is, not on which corporate super PAC can spend the most on advertising. So I ask you, I'd love to earn your support, but I ask you to call on all of the candidates to reject corporate super PACs in this race.
Well, thank you, all of you, for your thoughtful approach to these questions and for coming out here, all the way out here to Western Mass, as we always say. And maybe you'll realize it really isn't that far at all, is it? Because we go the other way a lot. So again, thank you, and thanks to the questioners. There's going to be a brief break where we set up for the next group of candidates. But thanks again, and restaurants are still open downtown if you're hungry. You too. Thank you. And I've watched your career as a counselor. I was a city councilor before I was my local elected. Yeah. Thank you so much. I know. I had so many issues brought up. I was like, no.
get started. Come on back. Okay. Thank you. Our next candidate. Hello.
So the extras like you make from Attorney General?
Can we get started? We really didn't mean for it to be a break. We
You
just
already
kind of
know.
meant there's going to be a change of candidates on the stage.
Bill's starting.
All right.
I care about.
Our next candidate that we're very lucky to have here is Tanisha Sullivan, who will be running for Secretary of the Commonwealth. Our panelists ready?
No, please. 'Cause I have primary day.
You ready? All set? Okay. All right. We're going to get started again. Thank you.
So I'm looking around the room to make sure everybody's settling in, because we're going to begin. We're going to welcome Tanisha Sullivan, who comes to us via Boston, but started in Brockton, the city of champions. And obviously, she's a champion to us tonight because she actually made the drive out here to meet with us to talk about the important role of Secretary of State. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for having me.
I'm not going to introduce our questioners again, but there'll be a quiz at the end.
Oh, boy.
And I think you can probably safely leave your mask off since there's, again, nobody else took the drive, so I think you're good. And we're going to start with your opening remarks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you this evening. I am Tanisha Sullivan. I am running to be the next Secretary of State, the Chief Democracy Officer here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Just quickly, by way of background, as was shared, I grew up in Brockton. I am the daughter of a public school educator. My dad spent 40 years working in the Boston public schools. He actually started working in BPS in 1974 as the buses were rolling. And when he retired, he was a school leader at the John D. O'Brien School of Mathematics and Sciences. My mom is a small business owner. She started 3 businesses from our home in Brockton. Her first business was to start an in-home childcare business for working families and families of color who needed at the time access to quality, trustworthy childcare. Sound familiar? And she very quickly realized that there were other women in the community who wanted to do the same. So my mother actually pulled them all together and she started a system to provide supports to other women who wanted to get started. Her third business was to found and co-publish the Black Pages of New England. The Black Pages of New England is a directory of Black-owned businesses across New England. It was a source of connectivity among the businesses to one another, and also an opportunity for those businesses to be connected to the larger corporations who were just getting started in supplier diversity. I am in my 20th year of legal practice. I am the former chief equity officer in the Boston Public Schools, and I'm a civil rights leader. I have the honor of serving as the volunteer president for the NAACP in Boston. And it is through that work that I've been working deeply with and in community and across the ideological spectrum to deliver meaningful advancement in racial, economic, and social justice. I look forward to the opportunity to share with you all tonight a little bit more about my why, and to hearing from you all after this program about your concerns as it relates to our democracy and your hopes for this office specifically. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question to you will be posed by Mr. Newman.
Ms. Sullivan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I know we all appreciate people from the eastern part of the state taking the long journey out here to the western regions. I'd like to ask you this. William Galvin has been the Secretary of State since 1994. I'm prompted to ask this question by the fact, as Clare Higgins points out, you're the only one at that table tonight. I'd like to have your evaluation of Mr. Galvin's record as Secretary of State, what his failures have been, successes if you think he has had some, and any thoughts you might share about his not being here tonight.
So first, I want to share a couple of things, why I'm running in response to that question. Two reasons in particular. One, because as we all know, our democracy is at an inflection point, to say the least. Too many of us are feeling disconnected, disappointed, and frustrated and concerned about where we are in this moment, not just nationally, but also here in the Commonwealth. And I believe that in this moment, it's critically important for us to have courageous, visionary, and inclusive leadership in the Secretary of State's office to help ensure that as we are fighting to hold our democracy together and move forward, that we're doing it in a way that ensures that we're leaving no one behind. And that is going to require that this office do more than just focus solely on the administrative and transactional aspects of the role and really work to stretch us into transforming this office into a gateway of opportunity for all people. One. The second is, as I shared, I'm a civil rights leader. I don't see another office in our state government today that has greater potential, untapped potential, to help us advance on the issues related to racial, economic, and social justice in the Secretary of State's office. This is the Chief Elections Office, responsible for voting rights and access. This is the Chief Information Office, responsible for how we, the people, access information and how we, the people, are able to hold our government accountable. This is the Chief Corporations Office. If you want to do business in Massachusetts, you've got to go through the Secretary of State's office in order to do so. I believe that there is too much untapped opportunity in this office that is keeping us from really being able to move forward as a Commonwealth on the issues of racial, economic, and social justice, and I'm running to help change that.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Frogameni.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. This year's Massachusetts Democratic primary is on Tuesday, September 6th. That's not only the day after Labor Day, it's also the first day of classes for many colleges and universities, including our local UMass Amherst. Is this primary date acceptable? And as Secretary of State, would you offer something different?
I believe that the Secretary of State has been solely focused on the administrative aspects of the role. Are you registered to vote? Have we identified a primary date? Have people registered to do business? And that has been it. And not focused on being a champion in our democracy. Not focused on the work that it takes to expand our democracy, to ensure that it is inclusive, to ensure that it is full of opportunity for all people. It is unacceptable that we have not been able to identify not only a primary date that takes into consideration when more of us would be able to participate in the voting process, but it is also unacceptable that today in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we're still fighting for some basic voting rights, friends. Here in Massachusetts, we're still fighting to be able to vote by mail, something that they can do in Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. Friends, we're still fighting for the right to be able to participate in same-day voter registration, which, oh, by the way, Maine adopted in 1973, a half century ago. What I can assure you is that I enter this race and I intend to be a Secretary of State who is absolutely operating with a civil rights lens, a justice lens, and an equity lens. And that means that we're going to do more than just the administrative piece of this job. We're going to do more than just check the box. We're going to make sure that this office is helping to deliver on the full promise of this country, of freedom, justice, and equality for all people. And this, my friends, is the only office in our state government that we have not demanded that of. So I am absolutely committed to ensuring that when I'm elected Secretary of State, that we are examining the elections calendar to ensure that it is as inclusive as it can possibly be.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. Just to build off that question and answer, what specific initiatives would you bring to the office to address issues of voter disenfranchisement?
Friends, here in Massachusetts, we have a lot of work to do to catch up with the rest of the country on the very important issue of the advancement of voting rights. I've already shared. Vote by mail, same-day voter registration are some very basic threshold entry points when we talk to voting rights and when we talk about voting rights and access. I firmly believe that at a point in time when Congress and our federal government has been unable to deliver on the full promise of voting rights and access, the #1 civil rights issue in our country today, that it is incumbent upon us here in the states to lead. And there's no other state in our country that has greater potential to be a beacon for what's possible than us here in Massachusetts. And so in addition to ensuring that, yes, we have vote by mail, we've got same-day voter registration, we've got extended early voting, I look forward to helping to support our municipalities in exploring the advancement of ranked choice voting, for example. I had the honor of serving as a co-chair for Rank the Vote Massachusetts in 2020. I look forward to encouraging and empowering our local municipalities in their discussions about lowering the voting age, not just because it's a good thing to do, but because I also believe that it's an important part of the learning process for our young people. My primary objective and belief as a civil rights leader in this space on the issue of voting rights is that we've got to do all we can to help ensure that if you are eligible to vote, that you do not have any barrier to do so. And right now here in Massachusetts, friends, unfortunately, we've got a lot of work to do in that space.
Thank you. I think we're back to Ms. Frogameni.
So my next question is an audience-submitted question, and it also speaks a little bit to this question of the administrative functions of the office. Massachusetts has made some progress on voting reforms, including early voting and vote by mail. But while these reforms have increased accessibility to the ballot, they can also add work to local town and city clerk offices that are responsible for carrying out these elections. What actions as Secretary of State would you take to expand access to the ballot box, as well as supporting our municipal town and city clerks so that they don't get overwhelmed?
So I'm going to push back a little bit on the question because we're really not that far on vote by mail. I want to make sure that this is an important point. Certainly as advocates, we have been advocating for vote by mail here in Massachusetts for decades now. It wasn't until the global public health pandemic, COVID-19, that we were able to freely vote by mail in 2020. That was an emergency flexibility that has now gone away. We are still fighting to be able to vote by mail, to have permanent vote by mail. So still more work to do. On this issue relative to our local elections officials and our town clerks, I absolutely believe that we've got to do more in this space. One, I am a supporter of the compromise position of election day registration, which functionally will deliver on what we as advocates have been fighting for, and that's the ability of someone who is eligible to vote to show up on election day, register to vote, and cast their ballot. And that flexibility is one that is supported by a lot of local elections officials because it allows them to prepare administratively to be able to support folks who want to register on the same day that they're casting their ballot. That's one. But much broader than that, I think it's important for us to understand that here in Massachusetts, we've got 351 different election systems. And every municipality is responsible for running their own election. And it doesn't matter if you are Wellesley, or you are Wellfleet, or you are Worcester, or you are Worthington, you get treated the exact same way. I actually believe that we need to bring more equity to the system. I would like to see the Secretary of State's office do more to provide supports to our local elections officials to ensure that regardless of where you're casting a ballot in Massachusetts, you have a same or similar experience, and it does not matter what resources are available directly in your community.
Thank you. Mr. Newman?
This is a question really about priorities. It's a political tradition of sorts for candidates to promise what they will do on the first day that they take office, or the first 100 days. And I'm wondering what your priorities would be. What would you like to accomplish on the first day, or in the first 100 days?
So I want to be clear on this point that I am offering a very distinct vision and path forward for this office. I absolutely believe that this moment demands more from all of us. It demands more from this office. And so what that means is when I'm elected, we are absolutely going to make sure that we are addressing the nuts and bolts of the work, of the mission of the office, the transactional and administrative aspects of the office. But we are also going to ensure that this office is held to the same, if not higher standard as any other constitutional office, and that it is doing its part to help ensure that this democracy is working for all of us. We are going to work to ensure that this office is truly a hub of democracy. And so that's a culture shift. And so number one priority for me will be helping to ensure that those who are working in the Secretary of State's office know and understand and are given the opportunity to participate in this culture shift. So we're going to do culture building work internally. And then we're going to do some culture building work externally. This office is woefully disconnected from community. And we can't talk about having a strong democracy if this office does not have a connection to the people. And so we are going to prioritize this office moving beyond four walls and pushing into community to be a better community member, number one. Number two, we've got to modernize the website, low-hanging fruit, so that it is a better experience, yes, for all of us, but even more importantly, that we are able to access the information we need to readily participate in our government.
Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. I'm going to dive a little bit into the administrative work of the Secretary of State's office. The Public Records Division is in the Secretary of State's office. In the past 10 years, the Public Records law was reformed. One of the champions of that was the late State Rep Peter Cocott from Northampton here. I'd like to know how you think, and first of all, what that primary things that did was supposed to do was provide more transparency, to lower costs for public records, to eliminate some of the barriers. How do you think those reforms are working? And secondly, do you support the exemption that still exists that exempts the legislature from the public records law? Massachusetts is one of the very few states in the country that still exempts the legislature from its public records law.
Mm-hmm. Massachusetts is the least transparent state in the country. We are the birthplace of democracy, and this is the state where it is the most difficult for the public to access public information. Unacceptable. We have allowed for the exemption of our executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government to all three be exempt from public records law. Unacceptable. Not in the birthplace of democracy. And so it's critically important, I believe, that we do more by way of access to public records than where we are today. I believe that in order for us to be the strong democracy, the inclusive democracy that we need to be, we need to start first from a point of believing that public information belongs to and in the public square. When it comes to our legislature, it's one of the issues that concerns me most, the fact that public policy is debated behind closed doors. That's not how our democracy was designed to work. And so to the extent that there are any exemptions, they need to be narrowly tailored with a specific intentional purpose. The second piece I'll say is that with respect to the current public records law, we've got a gap here. The Secretary of State's office is where one goes to appeal any public records decision. But it is the Attorney General's office that has the enforcement authority, which has in many respects left a gap, a wide gap, for the public and also for, quite frankly, the media, to be able to access public information. I believe that that is a gap that must be closed in the interest of our democracy.
Thank you. I'm going to do another round of 3, and then we'll see where we are on time. Okay, so we're back to Ms. Frogameni.
Thank you. There is proposed legislation in the State House which would allow municipalities, if they so choose, to lower the voting age to age 16 for participation in municipal elections, as well as a specific proposal for Northampton. What is your position on lowering the voting age, and is there a role the Secretary of State should play in this debate?
The Secretary of State is the Chief Information Officer in the Commonwealth. And historically, the way we've thought about it has been solely within the context of public records and public information. I actually believe that as the Chief Information Officer, there's a broader role for the Secretary of State in helping to ensure not only that we have access to public information, but also that we know how to use it. Right? So that we can all fully participate in this thing, this great experiment we call democracy. And so part of that is having a deep commitment to civic education. As I shared, I'm the daughter of a public school educator. I worked in the Boston Public Schools as the Chief Equity Officer. And so I believe that the Secretary of State has an important role in helping to ensure that our public schools have access to the resources and supports they need to be able to deliver on quality civics education. And as part of that educational journey, I am actually a very strong supporter of lowering the voting age in municipalities, because what better way for a young person to learn about how democracy works than to be able to actually participate in the act of voting in their own backyard, where there are supports available to help them understand both the great opportunity that exists in being able to cast that ballot, as well as the consequences that come from casting that ballot, both good and bad. So I am a strong supporter of municipalities specifically being able to lower the voting age as part of the learning process for our young people.
Thank you. Mr. Newman.
I'd like to go back, if I might, to a question Elena raised, which was about students voting, and raised as well the question about persons who are incarcerated voting as well. I'd like to know, first, with regard to the students, do you believe that the students should be voting in the municipalities from which they came, or should they be voting at or in the municipality where their college or university is located? And with regard to persons who are incarcerated, I'd like to know what steps you would take to ensure that people who are in jail and who are eligible to vote are aware of their rights, and to make sure that they have the opportunity to vote.
Here in Massachusetts, if you are incarcerated, pretrial detention, or on a misdemeanor, you have the right to vote, period. And as I stated earlier, I believe that if you have the right to vote, you're eligible to vote, we should be doing all we can to break down barriers to accessing the ballot box. And the fact of the matter is that in Massachusetts, though some who are incarcerated have the right to vote today, they're not able to do so structurally. This, I believe, is a failure in many respects, not only of a broken criminal legal system, but also, in many respects, a failure on the part of the current Secretary of State's office in not really partnering with our local sheriff's departments in particular around helping to ensure that folks who are eligible to vote, even if they're behind the wall, actually have the ability to cast that ballot free and clear. And so, yes, I do support the law as it stands, allowing those who are incarcerated pretrial and on misdemeanors to be able to cast a ballot. I also believe that we need to, here in Massachusetts, engage in the debate, the active debate on whether those who are incarcerated on felonies should also have the right to vote. Okay? We shouldn't fear debate or discussion. As it relates to students, I believe that where someone declares their residency is where they should be able to vote. And that we should be making it, again, as easy as possible for folks to be able to cast that ballot. If you're living in a municipality, you're attending school here for 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years, you are actively participating in community, then yes, you should be able to vote and have your voice heard in that community.
We have one more question from Mr. Crowley, and then you'll have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Thank you. It's pretty rare to see the Secretary of State out here in Western Mass, like strolling through the streets of Northampton. We haven't.
Having trouble.
I'm sorry. Yes,
having
thank
trouble
you.
hearing you.
Oh, you are? Can you hear me now?
It's muffled. Can you?
Is that better?
That's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's rare to see the Secretary of State out here in Western Massachusetts ambling. I talked to somebody about it tonight. They described it as maybe spotting an endangered species. But is there a role for the Secretary of State to play in getting out of Boston and visiting other parts of the state more? And how would you support that? Would we see you doing that?
Absolutely. This is not my first time in Western Mass. I might be taking up residency. Okay, it's not my first time. And I want to be clear on this point as well. It is fully I am an advocate. I am a civil rights leader coming into this space, entering into this role. That's not going to change. And what I know is that this democracy, despite all of its failures, it works best when we are in community, working with community, on the ground, helping to drive the change and the solutions that we need in our own backyards. And so it is fully my intention to expand the presence of this office across Massachusetts. Currently, there's an office in Ashburton Place, of course, as we know, Fall River, and Springfield. There needs to be more. There needs to be more of a presence across the Commonwealth. I intend to work with local communities, community-based organizations specifically, to establish more offices of democracy in our communities so that this office can be a better community partner to help ensure, again, that folks are don't just have access to information, but that we are being provided with the tools we need to actually drive the change needed in our communities to help advance economic, racial, and social justice and strengthen our democracy in the process.
Thank you very much. And you now have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
For me, this is probably more than a defining moment. This is the what did you do moment. I think it's important for us to recognize that we are living at a point in time in our democracy that no one's ever experienced. We are attempting to do something that's never been done before in humanity. And that is to deliver on the promise of a diverse democracy. Never been done before. Never been done before. And so what that means is that we don't have a roadmap. And as we are, many of us, looking with despair, deep concern about what's next for our country in this democracy, it's important for us to know that the status quo is not going to do. We will lose this thing. And it really is up to us in this moment. This is our what did you do moment. It really is up to us to decide if we are going to not just fight for, but if we're going to do the work required to truly deliver on a strong, diverse democracy that's working for all of us. I'm running because I believe that that's possible. I'm running for this office because I believe that we cannot afford to wait. This is a what did you do moment. And I am asking that you decide that you want to roll up your sleeves, that you want to keep believing and doing the work that is going to be required to ensure that we've got a strong, vibrant, and expansive democracy that is working for all of us. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you tonight, and I look forward to spending more time with you.
Thank you very much, and we hope to see more of you.
Thank you.
2-minute break while we break down the set for the next group of candidates.
Thanks. Is everybody ready? We are now welcoming the candidates for Auditor, and we're very grateful that they're here and stayed till the end, so you guys are bringing up the rear, and thank you so much, and here we go.
Okay. We're ready to roll. So welcome to our auditor candidates. Can you hear me? Okay, welcome to our candidates for auditor, Mr. Dempsey and Ms. DiZoglio. So since you've sat through everybody else, you know basically what the drill is. And we'll start with opening statements, and the person who has the opening statement in this order, it's Chris Dempsey and then Diana DiZoglio. So, Mr. Dempsey.
Thank you so much, Mayor Higgins and Elizabeth, and all of you who have had a role to play in putting this event together. It is great to be back in Northampton. Northampton is a Democratic powerhouse statewide. The last time I looked, Northampton was the 12th most votes in the state in a Democratic primary, and it shows amazing grassroots energy. You all have come a long way from Calvin Coolidge 100 years ago. So thank you for the chance to join you tonight. I'm Chris Dempsey, and I'm running to be your next state auditor. I'm running as the son of public school teachers. My parents met while teaching at the Martin Luther King School in Boston in 1970. They were placed in adjoining classrooms, and it was love at first sight. That's my dad's version of the story, at least. My mom was not convinced that it's love at first sight, but she eventually came around, and I was the result of that happy marriage, along with my little sister Allison, who's herself a public school teacher. And I saw my parents throughout their career digging into their own pockets to pay for school supplies for their students, as we know public school teachers across the Commonwealth do to this day. When you see that firsthand, you ask basic questions about why we are spending our public dollars in some areas and not in others. That led me to a career in and around public service. I served as Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Governor Deval Patrick. I'm proud to say that Governor Patrick has made a max contribution to our campaign. That is his first max contribution to any candidate running for office in Massachusetts in over a decade. But I've also worked outside of state government to stand up to protect the public interest as the co-founder of a group called No Boston Olympics. And Northampton plays a very important role in that story, because Northampton is home to Professor Andrew Zimbalist at Smith College, who happens to be the world's leading expert on the cost of Olympic overruns. He was the intellectual backing of our campaign. I look forward to sharing more about myself. Again, I'm Chris Dempsey, and I look forward, again, to the conversation today. Thank you.
Ms. DiZoglio.
Thank you so much, everyone. Great to be here with you all today. My name is Diana DiZoglio. I'm a state senator from the Merrimack Valley and a candidate for state auditor. I was born to a 17-year-old single mother and waitressed and cleaned houses to make my way through my local community college. I then earned a full scholarship to Wellesley College to become the first in my family to graduate. When I later secured a job at our state house, I was sexually harassed as a younger aide and had the unique opportunity to see firsthand how the toxic culture on Beacon Hill operates behind closed doors when there's no accountability. Instead of leaving state government like they told me to do, I instead ran for state representative myself and became the youngest woman elected to the House of Representatives at that time. I fought for accountability, transparency, and equity, and that's a fight that I took with me to the state Senate, where I currently continue to serve working families like ours every day. I'm running for auditor to ensure that no one, no matter our bank balance, our background, or our zip code, receives different treatment on Beacon Hill. As a senator, I've held the Baker administration accountable for its flawed COVID response, the preventable tragedy at the Holyoke Soldiers' Home, and the continued abuse of our tax dollars spent on companies who have willingly contributed to the opioid crisis. In working with Purdue Pharma, I've taken on my own Democratic legislative leadership team to stop the abuse of taxpayer-funded non-disclosure agreements that silence victims of harassment and discrimination, and I've challenged the legislature to make ourselves transparent to the people that we serve. I've never shied away from a battle to hold those in power accountable, and I never will. As auditor, I'll implement my 14-point social justice and equity audit plan that aims to dismantle outdated and unfair policies that continue to disproportionately harm underserved and marginalized communities that need much, much more attention that they have been receiving. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you and look forward to answering these questions. Thank you so much to all of you who helped to put on this amazing forum tonight. Ready to get started.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to start with Mr. Newman.
So I thank you both very much for coming, and I thank both of you for giving us some of the background and some of your experience. But you leave me with this question. Young people tend to say when they're growing up, when asked what they want to be, oh, I want to be the star right fielder for the Boston Red Sox, or a star center for the WNBA, or president of the United States, or a teacher, or a firefighter. They're like 1,000 answers to this question, right? But one answer to the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, that I think we've rarely heard is, gee, Mom, when I want to grow up, I want to be state auditor. So my question to you both is, when and what was the aha moment when you said, oh, state auditor, that's a job I really want to have?
And the first person to answer this question is Senator DiZoglio.
Thank you so much. Yes, so you just heard a little bit about my story. Look, friends, when I was growing up, this was never part of my plan. I had been working in nonprofits and community centers as a domestic violence survivor myself during childhood. I went to go work in a young teen girls' home, working specifically with young teen girls who had survived domestic violence in the home. I did a lot of work in community centers and nonprofits, and actually owned and operated a very small micro business, so to speak, cleaning company. I ended up getting a job at the State House, however, that was offered to me. Took the job, went to go work up on Beacon Hill, and I saw what was actually occurring behind those closed doors amongst our most powerful politicians. When they tried to force me to sign that non-disclosure agreement and held my severance package hostage until I did, upon my dismissal due to harassment behind those closed doors, I decided to run for state rep. Got elected, started fighting for transparency and accountability. I then moved to the Senate, where I continue to fight for transparency, accountability, and equity. And while we've made tremendous strides, we continue to be the least transparent and accessible state government in the entire nation. Now, I've been able to pass many bills regarding holding those in power accountable and keeping Beacon Hill transparent to all of you. But I've been able to be blocked in some circumstances. One of those circumstances, for example, is the continued taxpayer abuse of your tax dollars to fund non-disclosure agreements that silence victims of harassment, abuse, and discrimination across our state. They continue to be used by our most powerful politicians in Massachusetts, all over the place. As state auditor, even though I've been able to pass my bill in the Senate to ban the abuse of those tax dollars, as state auditor, I'll be able to do a full audit and an investigation of how your tax dollars continue to be abused in this way and many, many other ways. I've been standing up, speaking out, calling for audits, demanding investigations as a senator. But as your next state auditor, I'll be able to actually conduct these investigations. So the aha moment for me with that was when I learned that I would have the authority to use subpoena authority to do these investigations and shine a light on what's really occurring across our state government. Thank you so much.
So, Bill, this job of state auditor is about doing two things. It's about making state government work better and standing up to protect the public interest. And I've had the privilege of doing both of those things in my career. You heard that I served as Assistant Secretary of Transportation for Governor Patrick. While I was there, I co-founded the MassDOT program that created all of the smartphone apps that tell you in real time when your PVTA bus is going to arrive. And we made Massachusetts the very first transit agency on the entire East Coast to make those apps available to riders. So I'm proud of that record, working inside the bureaucracy to make it work better for all of us. But I've also stood up to protect the public interest, and it was in that experience that I understood and came to realize that in a democracy, it is ultimately our elected officials who make the most important decisions about the future of our Commonwealth. We knew with no Boston Olympics that we had the facts and the data on our side. We had an 80 or 90-page PowerPoint that walked people through why we thought this was the wrong idea, heavily researched, again with backing from Professor Andrew Zimbalist here in Northampton. We would take that presentation to appointed state officials, and they would end the meeting and they would say, we agree with you. We think that this is the wrong idea for the Commonwealth, but we're not going to say anything publicly, because it is up to our bosses, the elected officials, to speak on behalf of the government. So we had secretaries and cabinet members. We had executive directors of state agencies say that to us. And it was in that moment that I remembered or realized just how important roles like the state auditor are. As one of just 6 elected officials elected to serve everyone across the entire Commonwealth. It's a unique role in that sense, and it's why I have such conviction about my background being the right fit for this job and the opportunity that it provides to build a stronger Commonwealth for all of us.
Thank you. Ms. Frogameni is going to ask the next question.
Thank you, and thank you for being here this evening. It has been said that the auditor performs essentially 2 kinds of audits. 1 is the money properly accounted for, and 2 is the agency performing its function well. The auditor could do and has done audits of charter schools. Would you be inclined to do audits on charter schools to investigate if they are being successful in their mission, and how would you define that?
Okay, the person who's answering this question first is Mr. Dempsey.
Thanks so much. Elena, that's a great question. As you heard me say, I'm the son of public school teachers and the brother of a public school teacher. My sister teaches in New York City. Her wife also is a public school teacher in New York City. I believe that public education is maybe the single most sacred obligation that we have as a Commonwealth to our children, our students, and to the future of this Commonwealth. And my priority is always going to be traditional public schools that serve everyone who walks into the door of those institutions. As state auditor, it will be my obligation to ensure that every single state taxpayer dollar that we spend is being put to the best possible use. And that, of course, includes looking at charter schools, which receive public dollars and which need to be challenged and asked fundamental questions about the fairness and the effectiveness of the education that they're providing. So I am absolutely committed to looking at that question. And I will say, I enter that without preconceived notions, but knowing that we need to follow the facts wherever they lead in that conversation. But ultimately, we must have an education system that serves everybody, no matter their zip code, no matter their community. It is an absolute sacred obligation. We know we're not getting it right today, and we need more leaders at the statewide level who prioritize public education above all else.
Senator.
Thank you so much. Friends, without public schools, I would not have had the opportunities that I did. I am forever indebted to the teachers, the staff, and the community that served in those public schools. And I would say this is one of the reasons why when I first got elected as a state representative many years ago, I think it's about 10 years ago now, that I had requested to be a member of the Education Committee, where I fought to make sure that our state tax dollars and our resources are going back to those public schools in a fair and equitable manner, that we are funding Chapter 70, that we are funding special education and circuit breaker the way that it needs to be funded, that we are not ignoring our regional school districts, that we're not ignoring regional school transportation, and that we make sure that those charter school reimbursements back to the communities and to the public schools are actually coming back in the way that they're supposed to be. The answer to the question is yes, absolutely. I would be willing to do this audit. And I would say I would continue to do so in building upon my work to keep the cap. I worked very hard on that ballot question alongside of our public school teachers as a member of the state's Education Committee, again, which I served on for 6 years. And I think that we need to continue the work for transparency and accountability about the funding that continues to get diverted from our public schools, where all children are welcome and all children need those resources to be able to succeed, regardless, again, of our family background, our bank balance, or our zip code. I've had the opportunity to see firsthand in the current district that I represent up in the Merrimack Valley the disproportionate impacts that these, policies have had on diverting schools' funding from the traditional public school system over to these charter schools. And we need answers for how those things are working, where they're not working, to make sure, again, that we're providing that fair and equitable representation for all.
Thank you very much. Mr. Crowley.
Thank you. In October, a study by the current auditor found that Western Mass communities have long suffered inadequate support to maintain and develop public infrastructure, which resulted in a call for a rural rescue plan to increase Chapter 90 funds, create a public infrastructure agency, and enhance broadband access. The study examined roads, culverts, bridges, municipal buildings, police stations, broadband internet. The study found that if not addressed, the public infrastructure challenges would further exacerbate the state's east-west divide. And a related survey of local officials in the 4 counties of Western Mass reinforced that the region has suffered from an overall state policy focus on the state's more urban areas. As auditor, what steps would you take to ensure that the state's rural communities are receiving equitable treatment when it comes to the allocation of public resources and funding? And do you have any specific plans to do so if you were to take office?
We'll start with the Senator.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think I want to commend Auditor Bum for her most recent audits on these issues and many other issues concerning regional equity. And as your next state auditor, I would also be committed to making sure that our office has a focus on regional equity. Coming from the Merrimack Valley, we do not get treated the same as other communities that are more centralized to Boston, for example. We are up on the New Hampshire border. I represent several smaller communities that certainly do not see their fair share. And I know that residents have been concerned about these issues up in the area that I represent and don't feel like they're fairly treated. But when I come out to Western Mass, which is quite often, I hear much more of that and see that that's the case much more here, where you have not just rural communities, but you have rural remote communities as well. So what I would want to do is build upon that audit, which I did read, and subsequently as a senator sign on to Representative Pignatelli's letter to our leadership team to make sure that we are fully funding these initiatives regarding transportation, infrastructure, and broadband in particular. What I would also like to do in addition to that, however, in addition to calling on leadership, is as auditor, I'd like to continue to work on pilot reform, payment in lieu of taxes, pilot. What this is this is a program where the state is supposed to be reimbursing communities, mostly that exist out here in Western Mass, on the funds that are taken away from your communities that you would have received through property taxes, residential or commercial, on what now is state land. The state's supposed to be reimbursing you for that state land so that your communities can pay for your public safety departments, your public schools, your councils on aging, so on and so forth. But what Auditor Bum found is that that fund has actually been underfunded, so we need some significant reforms to make sure that your communities are getting your fair share from the state and that you're not getting gypped. So I will build upon that work and continue with pilot reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dempsey.
Dan, thanks for that question. That report was really a personal issue for Auditor Bump. She was a resident for many years of Great Barrington, home to 2 of my favorite Massachusetts residents of all time, W.E.B. Du Bois and Auditor Suzanne Bump. I was there this morning with State Rep. Smitty Pignatelli, who the Senator just mentioned. I'm honored to have his support in this race, as well as the support of State Rep. Natalie Blais, who represents the single most rural state representative district in the entire state. And I have made a commitment to them that as the next auditor, I will continue that work that Auditor Bump started and that was so immensely personal to her. What I thought was really special about that report was that when it was released, it didn't just receive attention from the Berkshire Eagle, the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the Springfield Republican. It also receives coverage from the Boston Globe, from WGBH, from WBUR, some of the greater Boston major media outlets that covered the importance of those issues. And ultimately, that's what's needed in the role of state auditor, is not to preach to the choir, so to speak, to talk only to people that already know about the existence of problems in rural communities, but that can speak to that broader statewide audience. She did that incredibly well with that report, and that's the kind of work and the kind of perspective that I want to bring to the office. To dig in a little bit more, I've spent a lot of time on transportation issues as Assistant Secretary. One of the programs that she highlighted in that report is the Chapter 90 program. That program is a formula that's based on population, on employment within the community, as well as total number of road miles. And it really gives short shrift to communities that have declining populations, that don't have large employment bases, but do have significant geography to cover. It's exactly the kind of formula we need to look at, and she started that conversation because of the strength of that report.
Thank you. Ms. Frogameni has the next question.
I want to kind of continue on the topic of specific goals and priorities for your office. When it comes to police reform, what specific work would you as auditor undertake?
Mr. Dempsey.
So there's a very clear choice in this race on the issue of police reform. Progressive Massachusetts, which has endorsed my candidacy, followed the votes of everyone in the legislature on the police reform bill. There were 10 key amendments, and every candidate who is running for statewide office this year received a 100% rating with Progressive Massachusetts. There was one candidate who received a 30% rating who's running for statewide office, and unfortunately that's my opponent. So there is a clear choice on police reform here. We need police reform, and I've made it a focus of my campaign that in particular the state auditor's office will tackle the issue of reform of the state police as one of just 3 statewide elected officials that have oversight over that entity. We put out a 15-point plan on reform of the state police that covers everything from hiring to promotions to training to looking at racial profiling in stops and in ticketing. That report received coverage from Adrian Walker and the Boston Globe as an opportunity to really advance reform of the state police. So I'm taking this approach because I have heard throughout the course of this campaign, including from the Northampton Democratic City Committee conversations, that the grassroots of the Democratic Party in Massachusetts, those of you who are here tonight, want to see more oversight of the state police. You're not approaching that, and I'm not approaching that with any hostility towards our troopers who are on the front lines. I have great respect for their service, but they deserve to work for an agency that they can be proud of and that we as taxpayers and residents can be proud of and can trust. We do not have that today, and I will bring that kind of reform-minded perspective to the Office of State Auditor. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator DiZoglio.
Thank you so much. There are clear differences in this race. For example, while I was voting on protecting transgender rights and transgender accommodations, my opponent was working at Bain. And while I was voting for the police accountability bill, my opponent did not say anything publicly about the death of George Floyd. I marched in the protests. I took the votes on the legislation. I worked alongside of the advocates. I stood with the people in my community on these issues. And I'm proud to say that I have the support of colleagues in the Senate who also worked on these issues, Senators Lydia Edwards and Adam Gomez, for example, one of which, Senator Gomez from Springfield, you might know, actually endorsed my candidacy in this race specifically because of my work on the police reform bill that included a complete ban on the police officer's right to abuse taxpayer-funded NDAs and silencing victims of police brutality using our tax dollars, because that was able to happen, and I had fought for the inclusion of that amendment in that proposal before I took the vote to support it, which I was very proud to do. As your next state auditor, I have been very firm in my commitment to continue that good work, and I have committed to auditing the state police. I have committed to auditing the peace officers standards training, which was present in the Criminal Justice Reform Bill of 2018, which I also voted to support proudly. And I have continued to reiterate this across the state, that I welcome all feedback about other ways that we can make sure that law enforcement is held accountable to all of us when it comes to treating people fairly and equitably and with respect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Newman, you are next.
I'd like to ask about the existential threat of climate change. And I would like to know what you as auditor would do to protect the people of Massachusetts in that regard.
And we start with the Senator.
Would you please just repeat the question?
Sure. With regard to climate change,
Yes, thank you.
what will and does and should the auditor do to protect the people of Massachusetts? And since we have invoked Auditor Bump, whether she has done a good job in this regard and whether there are changes that should be made in the office.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that she has done a good job, and I apologize, the echo in here is a little bit up here. So thank you so much for repeating. Yes, regarding climate change, look, friends, I had the humble opportunity as a senator to be able to fight for and support the Next Generation Climate Roadmap. And the last piece of legislation that we just voted for, the DRIVE Act, which is going to help us meet our net zero emission goals by 2050 and move to electrifying vehicles and transportation across the board, hopefully, a lot more quickly than we had originally planned. We're looking at 2035 now at this point, thankfully. We've done some good work, but we have a long way to go. There's so much more to be done. We are in a climate crisis right now. And as state auditor, coming from an environmental justice community, I was raised in Methuen and Lawrence, both gateway cities, low income, in Lawrence especially. I think that environmental justice has been my focus of looking at how we can make changes in the auditor's role. I have committed to making sure that we're auditing state agencies about their implementation of the Next Generation Climate Roadmap, because while we did vote to pass that, it was done after having to override the governor's vetoes multiple times to get that through. And since then, we've been hearing that there's been a lot of heel dragging and actually implementing the things that we passed. So we need to make sure that the administration, DPU, EEA, all of these agencies are actually implementing what we legislated. I've also committed to reporting on the Mass Saves program, which we have found through recent reports is unfortunately disproportionate. It has a disproportionate redistribution of the funds that it collects, actually taking more from low-income communities and then redistributing those funds to wealthier families and wealthy communities. So we need to promote clean energy, but we need to make sure that we're not doing so on the backs of our most low-income and vulnerable residents. So I've committed to reporting on that as well. Thank you.
There's a clear choice in this race on who will be a stronger ally and champion on addressing the climate crisis. I'm proud that we have led in this race, and we've proposed nation-leading ideas, including making the Auditor's Office the first in the country to incorporate carbon accounting into our audits of state agencies. I promise you that we will be the first Auditor's Office in the country to do this, but we will not be the last. When we start it here in Massachusetts, it will become a best practice for other auditors around the country. And ultimately, that's how we're going to win on climate. Not just driving emissions down to zero here in Massachusetts, but leading the way so that other states can see the path that we're taking. I've also proposed to create an Auditors Commission on Environmental Justice so that those who are on the front lines of the crisis have a seat at the table on Beacon Hill. And that doesn't just mean people that live in coastal areas. That also means people who live near a peaker power plant in Pittsfield that turns on at the periods of the highest energy demand and creates the dirtiest form of energy. It also means people that live in rural communities, like my uncle and aunt that live in Montague. When a road washes out due to severe weather, they may need to take a 10 or 20 mile detour to get to the grocery store just to get their groceries. So those folks too are at the front lines of the climate crisis, and they will be included at the decision-making table on Beacon Hill under my leadership as state auditor. I just want to correct at least one thing of the many things that were said in that last exchange on police reform. There was a statement made that I was somehow silent on the murder of George Floyd, and that is absolutely incorrect. At the time, I was leading a nonprofit called Transportation for Massachusetts, and within days of the murder of George Floyd, I issued personally a statement that went out to thousands of our members. We made a special email just dedicated to that issue. I suppose the senator wasn't a member of our email list and didn't see that, but I'd be glad to share that with her. I want to be very clear how public I was about speaking out against the murder of George Floyd, and there is absolutely no doubt in anyone's mind that was a member of our organization that was the case.
Thank you. This is the last question, and then we're going to move to closing statements. So Mr. Crowley has the final question of the evening.
Okay. The auditor has wide purview and authority to assess the performance of state entities and contractors and recommend improvements to make government much better. Given your assessment of the current work of the auditor's office, what areas need more attention from the office and may not be getting the attention they should, maybe because it's a lack of resources or some other reason? And if elected in your early days, what would you be prioritizing to change that?
And the person who's answering this one is Mr. Dempsey, and then you get the last word on that. Yeah.
I'm proud that our campaign was the first to put out a policy paper of any kind about what we actually want to do in the office. In fact, we put out the first 3. You've heard a little bit about our climate plan and our state police reform plan, but our very first plan was on oversight of federal stimulus dollars. The state has $5.3 billion to spend in the coming years. And most state programs, they're audited, or they're budgeted, I should say, on an annual basis. So you can come in and audit at the end of the year, you can figure out what didn't work, and you can fix things for the next year. But that doesn't work with one-time stimulus dollars. We don't want to spend all $5.3 billion, then audit, then realize we didn't spend the money well, but not have additional dollars to spend. So we're proposing to audit those dollars in as close to real time as possible so that we can recommend course corrections while those funds are still available. We're also proposing to incorporate many of the recommendations of what's called the Racial Equity Scorecard, which was developed by the NAACP, the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, the Mass Public Health Association, and other organizations that care about advancing racial equity in our Commonwealth. Look, I think Auditor Bump has done a stellar and superb and professional job as state auditor for the last 12 years. Even she said in her statement about not running for re-election that she is excited to see what the next generation can do with this office, that there is still untapped potential. And the way I interpret that statement, and based on my conversations with her over this race, is that there's an opportunity to be an even stronger advocate for the public interest with this office. It has a really strong platform as one of just 6 statewide elected officials. We need to make sure it's having a larger impact on the debate. We saw that with the Rural Rescue Plan. We can do that with so many issues, from public education to public health to transportation to the environment, and that's my plan as state auditor.
Thank you so much. I want to commend Auditor Bump for all the great work that she has done, and she has done some tremendous work. Some things that I would like to add to that work and maybe do a little bit differently. It's been no secret in my years of service that I have been fighting for transparency, accountability, and equity, fighting for committee votes to be made public, for 72 hours to read a bill, or at least an hour. We've been unsuccessful in being able to get some amendments that I have filed and led the charge on in the Senate to get at least an hour to read a bill that was actually voted down, believe it or not. To make sure that we're subject to the public records law. We're the only state in the nation, I believe, that's not subject to the public records law. We're not subject to open meeting laws, friends. And it is tremendously difficult for legislators to do our jobs with this lack of transparency from the establishment and the powers that be. But it's even more difficult for residents to be able to participate in the democratic process, obviously. As state auditor, I have committed to auditing the legislature and making sure that we're auditing not just the funds that we haven't been able to get access to. I've repeatedly asked for information surrounding what exists in the budget for staff salaries, for example. You might have heard that the staff are trying to unionize right now at the State House. I've asked for information about how much money exists to be able to fund those requests. I can't get access to that. So I'd like to do an audit of the state legislature in that regard, but also into the processes and the procedures that continue to disenfranchise working families across this Commonwealth who want nothing more than to have a voice in what's supposed to be the democratic process, but can't. So I will start with that as one of the initiatives that hasn't been done that I plan to work on, and we'll go from there.
So I will tell you, thank you both for your answers to all these questions, but my, the Master of Ceremonies, Elizabeth Silver, thinks we have time for one more question. So could I ask our panelists to confer and decide which question you want to do?
Oh, you.
All right.
Okay.
I knew they would be able to do that in a collegial way.
Sure. Okay, as a college student, transportation is an issue that hits very close to home for me. I made the trek over here from Mount Holyoke across the bridge, which here in Western Mass is kind of a long trek to get across the bridge. As auditor, how would you use your role and office to address specific issues of equity in transportation infrastructure between the eastern and western parts of our state?
And you get a demerit if you say east-west rail. No, I'm sorry. That was totally uncalled for. Say whatever you want. Mr. Dempsey.
Is this, okay. Do I get credit if I say west-east rail? Okay.
I was over my skis. I apologize.
All good, Mayor. So I've spent much of my career working on transportation and transportation equity, including for the last 4 years leading the coalition called Transportation for Massachusetts, which is made up of organizations like the League of Women Voters, the Conservation Law Foundation, the Environmental League of Massachusetts, and many others. We've made it a priority on this campaign to be riding public transit. I have ridden multiple commuter rail lines, multiple MBTA lines. I've ridden the Metro West RTA, the Worcester RTA. I have not yet been on the PVTA on this campaign, but I have ridden the PVTA in the past. And I will be the first statewide elected official to commute to Beacon Hill by transit since Mike Dukakis left office in 1991. It's been 31 years, and it has been way too long since we have had a transit rider's perspective represented at the highest levels of Beacon Hill. I want to assure you that that is not a campaign gimmick. That is how I get around, is riding public transit. And so it's just natural for me that I would commute that way. But we know, and I know from working with people like Rep. Natalie Blais, who again represents the most rural state rep district in the state, that transportation access is not equal across the Commonwealth. I did a town hall with her in Leverett, Massachusetts a few years ago, and we heard all sorts of really creative and interesting ideas from the residents there about how we could make transportation more sustainable, more accessible. That is a community that lost bus service, that's fighting to get bus service back, just to get into town to Amherst in their case. So I will be a champion for public transportation, a champion for sustainable transportation. That's what I've done for my entire career, and people can expect that I will do more of that as the next state auditor.
Thank you so much. So this is an issue that's personal for my entire district actually right now, and I know it's obviously personal to a lot of people here, but again, coming from the Merrimack Valley, and obviously my challenger has a different experience being from Brookline, coming from the Merrimack Valley, we have a very challenging time getting access to the resources we need to fund our roads, fund our bridges, fund the bike paths and bike lanes, fund the RTAs locally. Because they're not necessarily the area of focus for the people that hold the seats of power on Beacon Hill right now, who live very, again, Boston-centric and in other areas, and don't really understand the unique challenges that we face regarding transportation. So I have fought through the years to make sure that our buses are funded. We just actually were piloting in the Merrimack Valley, which I'm so happy about. We just hosted Senator Elizabeth Warren there to talk about this great initiative, free, fair bus rides for folks in our community so that our most vulnerable can get access to that much needed public transportation. We need to start doing that all across the Commonwealth. And I'm really excited that we have increased funding through the years to our RTAs and to Chapter 90 and made sure that we are, looking at that funding. But I really think that, what Auditor Bump did was tremendous recently when she did that report, highlighting the need for regional equity, pointing to the areas where this part of the state in particular is seeing the short end of the stick. You're getting the short end of the stick. You're not getting the funding that has been promised to you by the state. So again, I've never shied away from a battle. I have been able to stand up and speak truth to power regardless of party affiliation, and I will be very loud when it comes to making sure that we are demanding equity when it comes to the distribution of those transportation funds so that all families in Massachusetts, again, regardless of our family background, bank balance, or zip code, can get equal access to these types of opportunities.
All right. I think it's time for closing statements. So I think, Senator, you go first on the closing statements.
Thank you so much. I I just want to say it's been a very humble honor to be here with all of you tonight. I did not expect this crowd, and I think that it is fantastic that so many people, so many advocates have come out to participate in the democratic process. So I just want to thank you. It's a very humbling experience to run for statewide office and to get to share your story and to share your ideas with people and to get feedback from everybody. And we've been able to have these conversations here today. I just want to ask that we continue these conversations, and I want to make sure that you have access to me if you want to reach out to me. So I'm going to give you my website really quick so you can go there and grab all my contact information. It's www.dianaforma.com. Please feel free to reach out, call anytime. I'd love to chat with you about your ideas, ways that you think that we could improve upon our audit plan and make it even better. We can't do anything that we do without you and without these conversations, so I hope to continue having more of them. I do also just want to give a shout out. I know that Rep. Sabadosa had walked in. I don't know if she's still here, but she was here, and I just want to say a big thank you to her and her great work on your behalf, and along with Senator Comerford, my colleague in the Senate. You could not ask for a better state delegation here in your wonderful community. So I want to give a shout out to them and say thank you to your delegation for their service here. We look forward to continuing to advocate through this budget season. We're going into the Senate budget in just a couple of weeks here. I look forward to standing with them for your concerns. But as your next state auditor, again, I'm looking forward to being able to fight for all of us to have a seat at the table where the decisions are made. And I commit to making sure to stand up, to be your chief accountability officer, to speak truth to power, to hold those in power accountable, to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear, and that state agencies and state leaders are answering to the people that they serve. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dempsey.
Thank you again to our organizers of this event, Elizabeth Silver in particular, to Clare, to our questioners and moderators tonight. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm really proud to be endorsed by great statewide organizations, especially progressive organizations like Progressive Massachusetts and Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts, both of which interviewed the candidates in this race. Progressive Mass asked us for a 50-plus page questionnaire, and 78% of their members voted to endorse us in this race, endorse me in this race. 91% of the members of Progressive Democrats of Massachusetts voted to endorse me in this race. But I'm just as proud to have local endorsements like former Mayor David Narkowitz, with whom I worked on transportation issues here in Northampton and across the Pioneer Valley, and he's a strong supporter, one of my earliest local endorsers in this race, all the way back to last summer. I live in the first floor of a triple-decker, about 2.5 blocks from where I grew up and where my public school teacher parents still live. And I live there with my amazing fiance, Anna. Anna and I are getting married 2 weeks after the Democratic Convention, so we have a very busy summer ahead of us, in June in particular. But Anna and I are looking forward to starting a family together. And we want that to be in a Massachusetts that is the best that it can be for everybody. And that means making Massachusetts state government the best that it can be by making it more transparent, more accountable, more efficient, and more fair. And that is why I'm running for state auditor. I would be honored to have you join former Mayor Narkowitz and so many others across the Pioneer Valley in supporting my candidacy. We need your help and your support at the convention and in the days ahead as we approach the September primary. We have over 1,500 individual contributors, by far the most of any candidate in this race, and we'd be honored to add you to our team. Again, I'm Chris Dempsey, candidate for state auditor, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody. I want to especially thank Dan and Bill for this is the second of two forums that they participated in. And I want to thank Elena for being here tonight when she should be home studying. And so we're rooting for you. And thanks to everybody who's watching and who's here tonight for coming out and participating in this forum. And now on to conventions and on to voting.
Thank you. Yes, the finals start. My first essay's due on Thursday.